I never imagined something as ordinary as paying rent could turn into the beginning of a secret I would struggle to carry. That afternoon was supposed to be routine: hand over the envelope, exchange polite small talk, and leave. Instead, it became the first time I questioned not only my loyalty to Ethan, but also the quiet stability of the life I thought I was living. My name is Daniel, 32 years old, working long days at a job I don't particularly love, but can't afford to leave. For 3 years, I've been living with my boyfriend, Ethan. On the surface, we appear steady, even enviable. Two men sharing a decent apartment, splitting bills, navigating adulthood together. Yet behind closed doors, things have shifted. Ethan is often distracted, buried in his phone or lost in work, and when he looks at me, I feel more like a roommate than a partner. Conversations have shortened, touches have become rare, and the silence between us grows heavier each week. That silence followed me even as I prepared to walk over to my landlord's place with the rent. I tucked the cash into an envelope, checked the amount twice, and tried not to think about how Ethan hadn't asked if the bills were paid. He used to care about those details. Lately, it felt as if I handled everything alone. Michael, my landlord, lived in the large, older house at the end of the block. He was in his mid-40s, broad-shouldered, with a natural confidence that seemed to fill any room he entered. I'd always considered him kind but distant, someone who greeted me with a nod or a half-smile when I passed. He kept the property well-maintained and never raised the rent unfairly, which made me grateful, but never curious. At least not until that day. I knocked, and Michael opened the door almost immediately, as though he had been expecting me. He wore a plain t-shirt and jeans, casual but neat, and his expression carried a warmth that disarmed me. "Daniel," he said, smiling in a way that felt less like courtesy and more like recognition. "Hi," I replied, holding up the envelope. "Rent for the month." Michael didn't reach for it. Instead, he stepped aside and gestured for me to come in. His house was brighter than I expected, filled with sunlight pouring through wide windows. I hesitated at the threshold, then followed, unsure why he hadn't simply taken the envelope at the door. Once inside, I extended the envelope again. "Here you go." Michael shook his head slowly, a trace of amusement in his eyes. "Not this time," he said. I frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" "I don't need your money this month," he answered, voice calm, almost playful. The words landed strangely, like a puzzle I couldn't solve. I don't understand," I said, lowering the envelope. "You've been a good tenant," Michael explained, leaning casually against the edge of the kitchen counter. "Always on time, never a problem. Consider it a gesture." A gesture that should have been reassuring, generous even, but the way he said it left me unsettled. His gaze lingered on me longer than it should have, steady and deliberate, as if he were waiting for me to read something unspoken in his expression. I nodded, awkwardly, slipping the envelope back into my jacket pocket. "Well, thank you. That's very kind." "You're welcome," Michael replied, but his smile carried a weight I couldn't place. The conversation drifted into ordinary topics: the weather, the neighborhood, small talk that should have been forgettable. Yet I couldn't ignore the subtle intensity in his tone, the ease with which he leaned closer, as if confiding in me. When I finally excused myself, I walked back to my apartment with a strange tightness in my chest. Ethan was on the couch when I returned, eyes glued to his phone, barely acknowledging me. I opened my mouth to mention the odd encounter, but decided against it. He wouldn't have listened, or worse, he might have laughed it off, dismissing my unease as overthinking. So I kept quiet. That night, lying beside him in bed, I stared at the ceiling long after he had fallen asleep. Michael's voice echoed in my mind. "I don't need your money this month." Simple words, yet charged with an energy that unsettled me. Why would he refuse rent? And why had I felt my heart quicken under his gaze? The envelope still sat in my jacket pocket, untouched, as though holding it bound me to a secret I hadn't chosen. I knew nothing had happened, not really, but something had shifted, something small, yet undeniable. And as I closed my eyes, one thought refused to leave me. This was only the beginning. The following week slipped by with uneasy normalcy, though my mind remained tangled in the memory of Michael's refusal. The envelope of rent money still lay in my jacket, untouched, as if it held a secret only I understood. I told myself it didn't matter, that Michael's gesture was harmless generosity, yet I couldn't shake the intensity of his eyes or the faint thrill that had rushed through me as I left his house. At home, Ethan and I functioned like two actors sharing a stage. We spoke when necessary about groceries, chores, schedules, but warmth had all but vanished. I noticed it more acutely now, the absence of his touch, the way his laughter had grown rare. I wondered when we had stopped being lovers and become something closer to reluctant companions. Perhaps I had been blind to it before, but Michael's attention had sharpened the contrast. One evening, as I walked past Michael's house on my way home, he was outside watering the plants along his porch. He looked up, smiling in a way that seemed deliberately aimed at me. "Daniel," he called, lowering the hose. "You've been busy." I slowed, my pulse quickening. "Just work, same as always." "Come in for a coffee," he offered, casual yet insistent. "You've got time, don't you?" I hesitated, telling myself I should keep walking, but something inside me craved the invitation. I nodded, following him inside. The house smelled faintly of cedar and freshly brewed espresso. Michael moved with ease, setting cups on the counter, as if having me there was natural. He asked about my job, my routines, my plans, questions Ethan hadn't posed in months. His listening was disarming. Each answer I gave seemed to matter to him, as though my words carried weight. Our conversation drifted easily, and I caught myself laughing, a sound I hadn't heard from my own throat in far too long. When his hand brushed against mine as he passed me the sugar, the contact was small, fleeting, yet it lingered in my body like a spark. I swallowed hard, pulling my hand back, but the moment had already carved itself into my awareness. Walking home afterward, guilt pressed down on me. Nothing had happened, not really. Yet I knew better. The way I'd leaned into his attention, the way I'd welcomed it, it was a quiet betrayal. Ethan was waiting in the apartment, scrolling on his phone, barely glancing up as I entered. I thought of telling him about the coffee, but I didn't. Some truths are easier left unspoken, especially when they reveal desires we fear to name. Days passed, and the distance between Ethan and me widened. An argument erupted one night over nothing more than dirty dishes, but it carried the weight of years of neglect. Ethan's words were sharp, mine defensive. Eventually, he slammed the bedroom door, leaving me alone on the couch, seething and exhausted. The next morning, I found myself standing once again at Michael's door, the envelope of rent still tucked in my jacket. He opened with that same steady smile, and when I held out the money, he shook his head. "I told you," he said softly, "I don't need it." I should have insisted. I should have left. Instead, I lingered, my voice faltering. "Why?" Michael's gaze locked on mine, unflinching. "Because I like having you here," he admitted, his tone low but clear. The air thickened between us. My chest tightened, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. His honesty was a line crossed, one I had feared yet secretly anticipated. My body leaned forward before my mind could stop it, our faces so close that the warmth of his breath grazed my lips. Then, at the last second, I pulled away. "I can't," I whispered, though even as I said it, my resolve trembled. Michael didn't push. He only nodded, his expression calm, almost patient. "I understand," he said, "but you don't have to pretend you don't feel it." I left his house, shaken, my heart pounding as if I'd done something unforgivable. Yet the truth gnawed at me. He was right. I did feel it. I felt it in the space between Ethan's silence and Michael's attention, in the difference between being ignored and being seen. That night, lying beside Ethan, I stared into the dark, restless and ashamed. The line between loyalty and temptation had blurred, and though I hadn't crossed it fully, I knew I was already leaning toward the edge, and deep down, I feared it was only a matter of time before I fell. It happened on a night that felt heavier than the rest. Ethan and I had argued again, this time about nothing more than groceries left unbought. But beneath the trivial words was a mountain of resentment. His voice had been sharp, mine defensive, and when the shouting stopped, he stormed out, slamming the door behind him. The silence that followed was suffocating. I sat alone, staring at the empty hallway, realizing I no longer recognized the man I once loved, or perhaps I no longer recognized myself. Almost without thinking, my feet carried me to Michael's door. The night air was cool, the street quiet, and each step felt like surrender. When he opened the door, I didn't even try to hide the turmoil in my face. "You look like you need company," Michael said softly. I nodded, unable to form an excuse. He stepped aside and I entered. The house felt warmer than before, filled with a gentle light that wrapped around me like comfort. I tried to speak, to explain, but the words collapsed into silence. Michael didn't press me. Instead, he poured a drink, placed it in my hand, and waited. His patience was its own invitation. When our eyes met, something in me broke free. I leaned in before doubt could intervene, and this time I didn't pull away. Our lips met, hesitant at first, then with growing urgency, as though we had been waiting for this inevitability all along. The kiss deepened, a collision of longing and regret, and in that moment I stopped resisting. The hours that followed blurred together, touches, whispers, the relief of being wanted. It was not simply passion, but a release of everything I had been suppressing, loneliness, anger, yearning. Yet even as I sank into it, guilt burned beneath the surface, whispering that this comfort came at a cost. The next morning, I returned home with the weight of two lives pressing against me. Ethan was asleep on the couch, his phone still clutched in his hand. I watched him for a moment, guilt twisting in my chest. For the first time in weeks, his face seemed softer, vulnerable in rest. I wanted to wake him, to confess everything, but fear silenced me. Instead, I slipped quietly into the bedroom, the taste of Michael's kiss still lingering. Days turned into weeks, and I found myself living between two worlds. With Ethan, I was distant, distracted, offering smiles that never reached my eyes. With Michael, I was alive, attentive, hungry for the affection I had been missing. The duplicity gnawed at me, but I kept returning to him, unable to resist the gravity of his presence. Still, guilt has a way of seeping into every corner. I began noticing Ethan more, the way he tried to reach for me during quiet moments, the rare times his laughter resurfaced, the subtle efforts to bridge the gap I had already widened. Each small gesture cut deeper, because I knew what I was hiding. One evening, Ethan confronted me. "You've changed," he said, his eyes searching mine. "You're distant. Where are you, Daniel? Who are you with?" The words struck hard. I opened my mouth to deny it, but the lie caught in my throat. My silence was an answer he couldn't bear. His expression crumbled, pain etching across his face like a wound reopening. "So it's true," he whispered, more to himself than to me. I tried to explain, stumbling over half-truths, avoiding Michael's name, but nothing I said mattered. Ethan's trust had shattered, and no words could glue it back together. He left the apartment that night without another fight, just a hollow quiet that felt worse than anger. Alone again, I sat with the wreckage of my choices. Michael had given me attention, warmth, desire, but had it been love or simply an escape? Ethan had grown distant, yes, but had I given him the chance to return, or had I abandoned him the moment someone else noticed me? The questions circled endlessly without resolution. I couldn't claim innocence, nor could I fully regret the nights with Michael. What I knew with certainty was that one choice had already rewritten everything. As I lay in bed, the space beside me cold and empty, I realized the truth I had been avoiding. Infidelity doesn't offer answers, only more complicated questions. Love, loneliness, desire, they had all collided, leaving me standing among the fragments, unsure which piece of myself to hold onto. And though the story was far from over, one thing was clear: nothing would ever return to the way it was.